welcome everybody. Like I said, don't be shy, but also don't feel pressure to join via video. We like to have these roundtable discussions just as, in the spirit of making investing a team sport rather than a solo journey. If you do have any questions or statements that you want us to address here, please feel free. Be as active as you are so daring. And let's get into it. Hey, Guadalupe, good to see you. All right, let's tee it off here. We have the Atikan team. Let's go. One of the initial topics that we brought up was seeing the investments you have as actual businesses. And I know that sounds like a really simple-minded or elementary thing to talk about, but I can tell you it's a really big paradigm shift when investors starting seeing themselves not as gamblers, number one, not, I would even say, as the typical investor, but as business owners, because that's what the American system has allowed us to do, to literally take ownership, fractional ownership of extremely large businesses. So Colin, to that end, let me throw it over to you. Talk us about the video that you sent over to me earlier, and tee it off for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a very, very important thing to not use the term stock market when it comes to your investments. And you say, like, again, we own businesses. The stock market is simply the marketplace that allows us the convenience to buy and sell those businesses, right? It's just the marketplace, no different than any other marketplace that you've probably been to, most commonly like a grocery market, right? It's just the market that allows you to buy or buy and sell the goods or the services that they have to offer. Right? So I sent Wes and my dad a video this morning. It was the 6th Costco opening in China, which happened earlier this year, and the line that wrapped around the building for those people in that town to enter the Costco upon its opening. And the reason that I think that was striking to us, we oftentimes use Costco as an example of how to own a business, how to own a productive asset. And one of the big kind of components there is, these companies wake up every single day trying to figure out how to do better business, next year or 3 years down the road or 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road than they have previously. Right. So, and Wes, I know you talk about this a lot with your clients out there, and it probably resonates more in Southern California than it does here in Northeast Ohio. But there are, around the California office, there are like 5 Costcos within a 15-minute, driving radius. In Ohio, it's not quite as frequent, but we can get to one. Probably everybody on this call from Ohio can get to a Costco within 15 or 20 minutes, right? So if there are 5 that Wes can get to in a 15 or 20-minute drive, right, you would think that in all of China, they would have a lot of Costcos. Well, the facts are that they don't, right? They just opened their 6th earlier this year. And why is that important? Well, they've kind of figured out the model, right? They have figured out how to successfully copy one Costco location and plant it somewhere else where it can now deliver value to a marketplace that it's currently not serving. So this one happens to be in the southern region of China. There are no Costcos available to those people. They open up a Costco, and now you have literally thousands of people standing outside the doors waiting to get in because they know the expansion that has taken place up north, right? So bringing it home, as a business owner, is this a good thing or a bad thing for us? Well, often the response would be it's a good thing, which is correct, right? Like, yes, this is a great thing. We are expanding the business. But the narratives that can get swept up on, if you're watching CNBC, they're talking about, did Costco's earnings call go well today? Well, that is not necessarily it's a little bit divorced from, hey, Costco's expanding into a marketplace that was once not served and now is, which ultimately increases revenue, which ultimately trickles down to increased profit that they can share with us as business owners of those companies, right? So I thought it was a fascinating visual representation of business doing the correct things to grow in the correct ways, which ultimately benefits the investor at its core.
Yeah, and if we sort of double click and zoom into this particular topic, it is so important that if we don't slow down the conversation around it, then you'll miss it. The amount of times where if you watch the media or you listen to certain podcasts, et cetera, where they talk about these companies as if they're just chips on a poker table, or if they're just these little ticker symbols jumping up and down, or if you pull up your phone and whether or not it's red or green for that day should dictate whether or not you should invest or divest from that particular holding. That is crazy. Like it's absolutely insane. This is why when Warren Buffett and formerly Charlie Munger, who just passed away, when they get up and they do their Berkshire Hathaway annual meetings, it's getting it back to the basics. Hey, we own these businesses that sell these goods and products to goods and services to consumers for a value exchange. You are giving that consumer a piece of value that they want and need for in exchange for dollars. And now I pulled this up just to really grasp the numbers that we're talking about here, because I do think when we just reduce it to digits and bits and bytes, it reduces the concreteness, right, of what's actually going on and puts it into more abstract territory. But if you can just start to take off a little bit of actually what is going on, I think it'll help us all as investors. So I'm going to share my screen here and see if this will work. This is what Colin sent me earlier. Colin, can you guys see this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from Twitter. Well, I guess X now. This is the video that Colin was referring to. That's the line outside of Costco, not inside. It's look at how long that snaking line is down the block and around the corner. It's insane. And all of those people are rushing in the door to buy probably more than they've ever purchased from a retail location in their entire lives. But just when you think about that, and then if you expand that, it's like, okay, look at all those humans buying those goods and services. Now, if we then go here, how do we bring it from that grassroots level to, let me show you this. Where is it? Sorry, bear with me here. It might take me a second. But the actual revenue that's then generated, oftentimes when we're referring to our investments, the media will refer to something called market cap. Market cap is basically the size of a company as measured by its number of shares outstanding times its current share price. This, in my view, can make a little bit of a distorted perception of what that company is actually doing, if that makes sense. I like looking at the revenues of the company, because then you can actually get a feel for the scope and the magnitude and the size of how much, these guys are actually pushing. Let me pull it up here. I had this great chart. Let's see. Okay. So here on my iPad, here is a chart. If you guys can see it, I'll read it to you. As measured in billions, 2023, right? Walmart, $611 billion in revenue. Amazon, $514 billion in revenue. ExxonMobil, $414 billion. Apple Computer, $394 billion. United Health Group, $324 billion. CVS, $322 billion, and on and on and on. My next question to you, to be answered inside of your head, is think about the magnitude of all that revenue, and then also ask yourself, how many of those companies do you contribute to? Do you own any Apple products? Do you own any Amazon? How many times a day are you purchasing from Amazon? So anyway, just wanted to take a step back and have a 50,000-foot view of what you're actually investing in, right? You're not just investing ticker symbols that are jumping up and down. But Joel, let me throw the mic over to you. What's your perspective?
So the annual shareholder meeting that you referenced with Berkshire Hathaway just happened last Saturday, right? And
Yep.
again, Warren Buffett made a very pointed effort to talk to the people in attendance and the people that are watching online that they don't buy stocks, they own businesses. They own great businesses. And he's said that for 50, 60 years, and it seems like it just goes in one ear and out the other for most people. But he made that point that buy a business, we're buying business. We're not buying the price or the stock or whatever. We're buying that business because we think it's a legitimate business. And then to Colin's point, the repeatable and the repeatable nature of a business like Costco. I just read an article about Kobe Bryant yesterday, and the guy that wrote it was struck by the fact that when he watched Kobe Bryant study someone. He didn't study what they did. He studied how they did it. And it was because he wanted to then go back and replicate those movements over and over and over again to become successful at the fundamental of what made that person he was watching successful. And it's just like a business. If you think of Costco or Walmart or CVS or any of these things that we continually, Apple for sure, any of these things that we continually frequent and pay money to on a consistent basis, they just replicate the same thing and do it over and over and over again. And they just become cash cows that become wonderful businesses to invest in. So again, it's a bit of a paradigm shift, like you said, Wes, but I think it's an important one, especially as people walk into retirement years, because that cash flow is what's going to sustain you throughout the course of your life.
Yeah, and I want to
And Wes,
throw
let
this
me
out there as well. Oh, please.
Well, let me just piggyback off that real quick. If you're still wrestling with that paradigm shift, don't beat yourself up. Warren Buffett had to go through that paradigm shift as well, right? He has talked about how he had it all wrong, and then he met Charlie Munger, right? Well, he met his mentor Ben Graham at Columbia Business School first. Then he met Charlie Munger, and he said, they were sort of right. They were sort of on the right track. But Charlie was the one that truly flipped his psychology around. Hey, you don't want to buy crappy businesses at like super cheap valuations and hope to make a little bit of a spread there. You want to buy wonderful businesses at fair prices and let the people, the management team, do their thing. Like, stop interjecting, stop overstepping your boundaries, know your limitations, buy the great businesses, and let capitalism do what it does from there.
Yeah, and I want to add here, because I've got this question from a client recently, and all the disclaimers, right? I'm not recommending nor going against this particular company, but it's just to draw an actual example because I think it's valuable for you guys. So we had, it actually wasn't a client, it was a friend who invested in Tesla, and they almost wanted me to confirm their decision to keep investing in Tesla. My position is own a lot of companies rather than just an individual company. Why? Because it's putting your entire life savings, let's say 25% of it or 50% into one thing, is just a foolish thing to do, in my opinion. Now, to teach us to think like business operators and analysts, if you look at a company like Tesla, outstanding product, I have a Tesla, I love it, etc. But what a lot of people don't understand about these types of situations is it's not that the bigger companies are dumb. It's not that GM, Ford, Toyota, that they're stupid, and by not breaking into a newer industry called electric vehicles. It's that they are waiting to collect the data to see if it's a worthwhile industry to invest in. So this is what allows Tesla to gain, I would say, sufficient market surface area off of competitors. But then guess what happens? Well, now you eventually get the attention of the larger players because they're seeing there's an actual market. Well, when that happens, just pay attention, especially those of you who live in California right now. Just start counting the number of electric vehicles that you see around you on the highway. I guarantee you it's significantly more than just Teslas, right? Kia, Toyota, Lexus, Ford with the Mustang Mach-E, etc. What does that do? It brings a whole bunch more competition into the market, where now you as consumers have more options. So what happens to Tesla's stock price? And by the way, I'm way oversimplifying this. I know that, but it's just to prove a point. This poor woman put a lot of money, her retirement, into Tesla. And if you look at this chart right here, year to date, here's Tesla's chart. It's down almost 30%, right? And it's come up from its bottom for this year. Again, I know that's a simplification for the finance nerds here on this discussion, like myself, but you get the point. It's yet another example of why you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. As cliche as that sounds, just be careful of that. Be careful of taking water cooler discussions that you get from your friends and family and saying, "Oh, yep, that's a sure thing," when you actually haven't done the analysis yourself. Colin, let me throw the ball over to you. Any perspective on that particular example?
Yeah, So for those of you that don't know, my mother worked at General Electric for 34 years, right? And this was during like the Jack Welch like heyday of General Electric. Um, the amount of her colleagues that were basically all in on General Electric it was more than not, right? That was the more prevalent path than not. And for a long time, they were validated, right? The share price kept going up and up. I think in the early 2000s, at least measured by market cap, General Electric was the largest company on the planet, right? So we're not talking about, as you guys know, we're not talking about like a mom and pop shop here. We're talking about a massive institution that we all kind of know the story now, right? And they may have rebounded some over the past handful of years, but a lot of her coworkers bet their entire retirement on General Electric continuing to do what it had done for basically, their entire working career. But they made some bad business decisions. They tried to get into industries that they really had no business getting into. And then it was bookend with the great, financial crisis of 2008, where, they lost, I think at the bottom, they lost like 90% of the value. So that, it happened to General Electric. And that's, maybe you're astute enough to like see that one coming. I don't know how, a lot of people would be able to account for, traditional innovation. I don't think the folks that manufactured the Walkman were stupid people. I think they were great innovators and great business leaders. It's very difficult to solve for Steve Jobs coming around and creating a much better, more innovative device, right? Which makes Walkmans and all of the other comparable products irrelevant or, certainly less valuable, right? So not only can you just have like, bad business or bad management or bad decisions, et cetera, but I would almost argue it's even tougher to account for the innovator, the disruptor who comes into the industry, the Jeff Bezos who puts Sears and Kmart and JCPenney, basically out of business because he can offer you everything that they offer, a whole lot more from the comfort of your couch and contactless delivery within a couple of days. Yeah, like that's a very tricky element of stock picking to solve for when you're betting on a company or you're betting on an industry, but innovation makes them obsolete.
Joel, let me pass the ball to you, bud. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's the difference between, and we see this in a lot of areas, like tactics and strategies versus the timeless truths of finance. And it's probably true of any area in life. I think it's like you need to have, like Michelangelo. I think this was attributed to him. I'm going to say it was because I read it that it was. But when he created the statue of David, they asked him how he could create such a beautiful, ornate statue. And he said, basically, I just chipped away everything that wasn't David. So he had a vision based on the timeless truths of who David was and what he wanted to portray that. And I think strategies and tactics are abound in finance. I mean, they're everywhere. And, just taking them as one-offs as the answer to, and we talk about it all the time, but Bitcoin, for example, as a strategy to bolster your retirement planning, and make significant rates of return over the future. Well, the question, I think you brought it up, Wes, is how much would you actually, even if you believe in Bitcoin, how much of your, say, $1 million would you actually allocate to Bitcoin in order to make a real difference? Would it be 50,000 or would it be 500,000? Because 50,000 is probably not going to make a major difference in your situation. 500,000 might, but are you willing to use that strategy or, be all plan to actually make it in retirement? It's a much different thing. And it's much different when you're 63 or 4, like I am, or, and so maybe some of the people on the call, than it is when you're 24. It's just because you're playing with larger numbers and the mistakes are much larger. And I think that's, it's very, very important to get it right from that point on. So taking chances like that, not only is it unnecessary, but it's you can't sleep at night.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And hey, Barbara, welcome. So quick addition here. Updates on Social Security, pretty hot topic. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but just in case you haven't, let me share my screen with you here to show you what's going on. Updates in Social Security projections. Let's see. All right. So this article is from CNET. Okay, the fund reserves that help pay for Social Security are running out and have until 2035 when they will reach insolvency. and recipients will see a cut in benefits, according to a new report released by the Social Security trustees on Monday. Without a change in how Social Security is funded, the program would then be bringing in enough money to pay for 83% of benefits to those who are part of the program. Really fascinating topic. We teach this in our classes all the time. And a lot of times people don't believe us, but you can actually look on your own Social Security documentation and you can see that number. They just updated that number, I think, to 2035 from 2034. So it's actually moving in the right direction. But the 83% number is really important. We're not going to be able to solve this here on this call, but I do want everybody to be aware of the fact that if nothing changes, this is coming from the Social Security Department, if nothing changes in current legislation and funding, Social Security Department will only be able to pay for 83% of its obligations in 2035. Joel, what do you think about this?
I think it's being used as scare tactics in a lot of marketing. I think it's real, first of all. It's absolutely real. But it's one of those things that people can pull that particular line out of a study or a report that comes out by the government, and it's absolutely real, a real problem. How they fix that, I don't think anybody really knows, to be honest with you. They're going to fix it because I know, and we talk about this all the time. If you watched France recently, when they raised their, I think it was from 62 to 64, 63 to 64, their retirement age, the people just wondered if they pushed the retirement age back. If our government promise that the United States government has made to our people, if they don't pay that out at some point in the future, I can't see anything less than riots in the street. I mean, it's paid into it. Everybody expects it. The problem is that they haven't kept up with the actuarial part of it. And we're now collecting Social Security on average for 23 years, as opposed to how it was supposed to be collected on, which was just a safety net for people who didn't have enough money, but they only lived for 4 or 5 years in retirement and then they died. So now we're collecting it for a quarter of our lives as part of a overall retirement plan strategy, and the government just didn't fund it, or they misspent the money. Whatever, it doesn't really matter how we got here. We are here now, and they're going to have to fix it at some point in time. If you pay attention to anything in politics, I think you probably understand that there is zero consensus among anybody today in politics. So I would guess that they fixed that at the 11th hour, which means the fix is going to be more expensive than if it were started to be fixed today. So that's probably the bigger issue than are they going to fix it or not. Everybody on this call that's my age or around my age will get Social Security. You younger kids, I'm not so certain about. It's not going to be in the same form as we're going to get it. But thank you for paying our Social Security checks into perpetuity. We will get those, and you guys will be working to actually make sure that happens. But they're going to fix it. So I don't want to scare anybody. I don't want to certainly use scare tactics. The question is, will they look at it and then say, well, Wes, you say, or John, you've saved enough money. We don't think you need all the Social Security check that we promised you. So we're going to means test you out of that check that we promised you we'd give you. You're only going to get 70 or 75 or 80% of that. I can see that happening. I can also see them kicking the can back down the road of what the actual retirement age is, which is the real answer. And probably increasing the withholding into the fund. But that doesn't solve the issue of they misspend the money. So we can do all those things, and if they continue to misspend the money, that program still has problems into the future.
Well, I'm going to give you guys a really disgusting analogy on this, so that way it sticks in memory. I have a friend who apparently has a condition where his armpits sweat profusely. So he got a surgery. And sorry, I gave the disclaimer. It's a disgusting example, but you will remember this, I'm sure. So he got a surgery or something that like plugs the pores. The problem then is like the body's trying to release that liquid somewhere. So now his stomach sweats like 3x more than it sweat before. So he literally gets a ring of sweat around his t-shirt. So again, I'm sorry for the disgusting analogy, but the way that I see it, Joel, is that sure, can we plug this particular part up so that like, you know, you're not going to have the problems in Social Security and people are going to get paid out? But that problem will get released somewhere else, in my opinion. We can only maintain insolvency or a certain debt to revenue ratio for so long. So my question would be, where's it going to come from? You know, and I struggle to think of how we are not going to increase as a nation taxes in the future. Like I just can't mathematically figure out how we're going to do this. And it seems like when I talk to other finance people, like they're coming to the same conclusion. So I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know who's going to pay the piper for it, but it's got to be paid somehow. Colin, what's your perspective?
I think it takes fifth grade level math to study that for a reasonable amount of time and figure out exactly what you just said, right? What we owe the American people versus what is projected to come in does not rectify itself. And this is how, you know, we talk about it a lot in the class that we teach. Our nation had $5 trillion of national debt in the year 2000. So when the second George W. Bush was elected into office in the year 2000, he inherited $5 trillion of national debt. So what, 225 years basically of our country's existence that got us to $5 trillion of national debt. If anyone's been paying attention today, that debt it has 6x'd. So it's about $35 trillion of debt our country's in, right? So the first 224 years of existence, $5 trillion. Over the last 24 years of existence, we've added $30 trillion to the national deficit. And we continue to run trillions of dollars of deficits per year. Right. I think what we're kind of figuring out, and I know you say like America's, you know, was born in 1776, and it feels like that's a long time. That's actually really young for a country, relatively speaking. I think what we're waking up to now, and I'm glad to finally see business leaders starting to sound the alarms on this. What we're waking up to now is that we have designed a country that we cannot afford at current revenue levels, right? So something has to give. We either figure out a way to cut spending, we figure out a way of me saying increase tax. Also, some of energy boom. How do we make, you know, the same amount of energy cost less over time? But I think those get like those get over my head, frankly. And I think it's super basic. Increase revenue, therefore increase taxation, cut spending, or a combination of the two. And I don't think this is like a 50 to 100 year rectification process. I think it's probably more of like a 10 to 20 year rectification process. And the reason that we've educated and talked on it for so long is that will very, very, very likely happen in most of our clients' retirements, which is why we continue to have these discussions and deploy strategies to help insulate ourselves. I don't know that this call has an answer for the spending issue. Right. Yeah, we can write letters to our congressmen and women till we're blue in the face. We can elect different politicians, et cetera, et cetera. That seems to be pretty bipartisan, that the spending is out of control. Yeah, so I don't really think it's a partisan issue either. I think we have an issue with politicians spending more than they're making, or quote unquote taxing. And that will have to rectify itself, or programs like Social Security and Medicare get cut. I think that that's the least likely alternative. Right. I think those two programs stay intact, but we steal from somewhere else, whether that means we tax people more, whether that means we push back the ages that you can go on to Medicare, Medicaid, or you push back the full retirement age benefit for people at, you know, a certain age or younger, you know, a combination of all of that or a whole lot more. You could probably solve it or skin the cat in a number of different ways, but just like any problem, right? The longer you let it persist, the more expensive and more hurtful the problem is to actually solve. And that's probably the scariest part in my mind. The politicians, the people in charge of solving it, are not incentivized to solve it. And that's why the problem, in my opinion, will continue to grow until it's the 11th hour, until we finally have to do something, which I actually think Americans are good at doing. We get our back up against the wall, then we solve the problem. But we probably could solve it in a far more efficient way if we just got out ahead of it and started having those difficult conversations sooner. Last thing I'll say on that, I really think in about a year's time, maybe slightly before, after the election and into the first part of next year, regardless of who wins, I think the tax code will come into the national spotlight, and I think the national deficit will come into the national spotlight. I think those two things will start to be a focus of the next president, whether it's Biden, Trump, or anybody else for that matter.
Colin, to your point, I think you just look at the people who serve in Congress right now. Most of those people will not be around in 2035, so they have zero incentive to solve that problem. So I think you're going to see the younger people start to put that, to your point, to the forefront as we go, not only after this election, but into the next several elections. They're going to start to make that one of the more prominent conversations, because they're the ones that are going to be in Congress and take all the heat for the lack of answers that if we don't address this issue and pay the American people what we promised them to pay. So I think it's a really good point. But the 4, 5, they're just not going to be around at that point in time.
I also wonder, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, if we have a structure that is based off of short-term incentives and solving long-term problems with short-term incentives, at least from my point of view, is extremely difficult, if not impossible. So I actually wonder if more of the solutions lie at the household level. I'll pull up this chart here. If we look at inflation, and this ties into interest rates, right? Which is a very hot topic right now as well. But I pulled this chart, and I'm sorry, I can't see the source on here because I just took a screenshot of it. But since January of 2000, if we look at some of these inflationary costs, I mean, look at what hospital services have risen by, and college tuition, and college textbooks, and medical care. I mean, we're talking all of and childcare, all of those are north of 100%. Hospital services north of 200%. I hate to sound like a broken record, but I do struggle to see how the government is going to solve that at the family level. And then this gets back to, well, how do we solve it just in general for our households? And I do struggle to come up with a solution outside of owning businesses and real estate and private companies, et cetera, that make revenue that is commensurate, if not north of the inflationary numbers. I don't know how you do it with being a lender instead of an owner. I know we've talked about this at length, but just looking at the economic forecasts, and from my point of view, knowing that we have a short-term incentive structure in our government system and we have long-term problems, I don't know how to solve it other than at the household level. Joel, what do you think?
I totally agree. I think there is a short-term incentive in the government because it's always the next election cycle. But you're right, and it sounds so simple when you say it out loud. It's like own the companies that inflate those prices like that. But again, we've got foundational problems in this country about why those things happen, and I think if we don't address those long term, the short term fixes are going to band-aid the problem, but it won't ultimately make a real fix where we can fix Social Security, say, for 100 years. We might band-aid it and fix it. The last time we band-aided it was in the 80s. Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill instituted the tax on Social Security, which fixed it for a while, and then it didn't solve the problem forever, though. And I think that's foundationally what we need to do. So, but again, when you have an election cycle that happens every 2 years, every 4 years, there's such a premium on short-term fixes, and to make it look like you've done something, reasonably effective in the short term, that you're not looking at long-term fixes like you're talking about, Wes, which is really where the ultimate answer lies. And I don't know how we always go back to the fact that financial planning's done on the individual level, which is the only hope that everybody on this call has. You can insulate yourself from all those things by doing personal financial planning, which is the answer to all of this, like Wes just mentioned, is like own those companies. It sounds like a broken record on our end, but you just go back to Warren Buffett's statement of, we buy cash flow, we don't buy price speculation into the future. It seemed to have turned out pretty well for him. So I think we should, again, model that behavior into the future, and it'll probably take care of most of our individual problems. We can't really control, other than voting. We can't really control what happens in politics and in the country as a whole.
Right. And the reason we want to arm everybody with this type of education is because if you catch it at the dinner table with your friends and family, and you hear somebody say some sort of general rule of thumb of oh, why are you invested in equities right now? That's really risky. It's like, pause right there and let's define what those terms actually mean. Because if you just combat it with, okay, well, can you show me how a portfolio lasts with your personal inflation that is very likely north of general CPI inflation? Show me how a portfolio lasts with inflation of 5-6% personally, and you have only bonds. How is that even possible? Right? And over a life expectancy of 20 to 30 years. I just, if somebody can show me that, then I'm open to it. But we have to be really careful to catch ourselves in these nuanced conversations that say, oh, well, my portfolio is risky versus not risky. Like that requires, in my view, actual mathematical proof, as opposed to just a casual one-off statement. And then all of a sudden you might force your neighbor or like impact your neighbor's portfolio, and you didn't realize that you were doing that. So it's really important to educate ourselves on these topics. Colin, let me throw the mic over to you. Any final topics or words of wisdom? And by the way, this section, if anybody has any questions, raise your hands so we can bring it up. But in the meantime, Colin, any final words of wisdom, buddy?
Yeah, I would just, like my dad said it, and I would like just to highlight it real quick. They already had an 11th hour issue with the Social Security program back in the 80s. So that's why we're confident it'll get fixed again, right? It's not that there's no solutions, but it is kind of an underlying of a larger fiscal issue in this country. And yes, a lot of what we discussed, we don't have the ability to fix, right? So it doesn't matter how much effort we put into it. That's not our problem to solve. What we can control is what we do on the local level, what we do in our personal planning. And that's where the attention should shift. Far too many people were energy on, hey, am I owning cash production over time, right? And is it pretty mechanical? Is it pretty logical? Is there reasonable or rational feedback loops? Is something that you actually do have a bit of control over, and we want to capture that control, because there's so many variables and so many, we typically over index on allocating energy to those topics.
All right, Joel, let me pass you the mic, buddy. Any final words of wisdom?
Yes. So I've watched a bunch of his lately, because when he retired, he seems to be speaking everywhere. But he had a really great kind of a quote about creating a winning culture. He had a great thing about discipline and actually doing the things that you need to do. And said, so when you need to do something, it's something that you're supposed to do, but you don't want to do it. Can you make yourself do it? That's the question. So that discipline is needed. You're supposed to do it. You don't want to do it, but can you make yourself do it? Conversely, the conversely is also true. It's, here's something I know I'm not supposed to do, but I want to do it. Can I stop myself from doing it? And that's, I think, to create that culture, and that's what we're trying to do. We talk about all the time being more of psychologists in our business than we are investment advisors or financial planners. It's like, there's so much noise out there, and there's so many things that try and get people's attention, that there's always something to distract you from the things that you're supposed to do, and you really should be doing it, but maybe you don't want to do it because it's not sexy, it's not, it's kind of boring, but it works. And you always have this thing where you can be distracted away from something. So can you stop yourself? And I feel that that's our job with our clients, is can we prevent them from doing something that we know they shouldn't do? And can we communicate that in a way successfully to them that ultimately those mistakes don't show up? And this is something we say all the time too. So excuse me if we're repeating it again and again, but you make a mistake when you're 60 or 65 financially, it doesn't show up when you're 70. It shows up when you're 80 or 85. And then that's the time when not only do you not want to go back to work, but there's really no market for you to go back to work and solve the problem. So we want to avoid those mistakes today that are going to show up 15, 20 years from now, simply because that's going to be the time frame of our retirement. It's going to be a multiple decade, more than likely 2-person retirement, and it costs money to do that. So we don't want to make mistakes in our 60s or 50s or 60s that will show up in our late 70s and early 80s, and we have no recourse on fixing them at that point in time.
Yeah, well said. And I want to add this as well. I'm going from a friend discussion that I had yesterday, another guy who's in a similar business, and he was telling me about this investment firm that they were doing business with, and their clients are currently down from a year and a half ago, 40% per what he was saying. And I was like, well, how's that even possible? The markets have been up, pretty tremendously over that same time period. And it turns out what they were doing is what we advise against all the time. That firm was basically doing speculative asset investing, and the big pitch was, well, we're going to get all of these special investments inside of here that are, that are going to go up, just give it time. Well, these people, this is their retirement. So this is not the time to be getting fancy. It's not the time to be gambling. This is the time to make sure that you are leaders and stewards of your money for yourself and for your family. And I know that sounds maybe a little old school and a little too cliche, but I can't imagine what it's like to be those people right now who are mid-retirement and their portfolios are down by 40%. That's not to say that your investments, all investments at some point or another go down. But when they're going down by almost half, and the rest of the world is making a lot of progress, and a lot of other investments are making progress, and yours isn't, that's a really hard pill to swallow. So just again, reinforcing, do not speculate. It is not worth it. This is your livelihood for the rest of your life here on Earth. So anyway, I love you guys. Appreciate you. If you have any questions as a result of this particular meeting, give us a call. We're happy to help however we can, and we will see you next time. Thank you, guys.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.